has been made the Rainbow Covenant. And now we're going to get basically the lineage from Noah to Abraham. Noah to Abraham. So let's look at a few things that are spoken of in terms of these lineages. Let's look at some things that happen in terms of language, and then we'll move forward. So first, let's go here. We are in Genesis chapter 10. So the flood has happened. And Genesis chapter 10 is basically it shows the lineage of Noah's children. And so Noah has the three sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. The descendants of Japheth are called the Japhethites. The descendants of Ham are called Hamites. And when we get to the Hamites, we get to some cultures and some people groups that we know. The Cushites, or from Cush, the Egyptians from Egypt, the Canaanites we see from Cain. These are all children of Ham. Now, I want to address again how the Bible can be used as a weapon when it is interpreted improperly. One of the things that used to be taught in churches about the Bible is that the Hamites, if you look at the peoples here, it's the Cushites, the Egyptians, Put, and the Canaanites. It was taught that the descendants of Ham were people of color, and that the descendants of Ham were cursed. And so people of color were cursed because they were descendants of Ham. And Cushites were believed to be from the northwestern region of Africa. Of course, we know where Egypt is. And then you had the Canaanites. But one of the things that was done, that was used to justify for years the reason why people of color, and in our country specifically black people, had the plight in the situation that they had, slavery, poverty, crime, all of those things that we had to deal with, was because we were cursed, and that was just the way God wanted it. And of course we know that that is a bunch of bunk, to put it lightly. But that just shows one of the ways that if the Bible is not used properly, it can be used as a weapon by people who don't know any better, or people who are just unscrupulous or evil. Now let's go down a little bit further, and we see that the children of Shem are Semites. Where have we heard that word before? Semites. Anti-Semitism. Okay. Here's the interesting thing. When I say the word, and this is going to show you how language changes, and sometimes I'm going to use a few examples. We'll see how language changes to the point where it makes really no sense from the original meaning. Semites, okay? When we say the word anti-Semite, what comes to mind is someone who is anti-Jewish. The issue there is that there's another group of people that fall into the group known as Semites, and that would be Arabs. And so technically, if we look at what the meaning of the word should be, not what it has grown to be, a person who was anti-Semitic would be a person who was against not only Jews or Hebrews, but a person who was also against Arabs. What have the words evolved to? Anti-Semitic means, against Jews. What is someone who's against a person who doesn't like Arabs? What would we call them? We would call them an Islamophobe. Again, the problem there is that Islam, as a religion, encompasses much more than Arabs, and all Arabs aren't Islamic. But that just goes to show you how language can evolve, and sometimes evolve in ways that, and if we took into consideration the meaning of words, it does not make sense. Not only that, when we look at the phobe word, Islamophobe, where else do we see that? Homophobe. Phobe, what did phobe used to mean? I don't know if it means the same thing anymore, but it used to mean one who has fear of, or to have the fear of. Islamophobe, a fear of Islam. Homophobe, fear of those who are homosexual. And when we look at the way that words have evolved, what does that mean now? And actually those words, anti-Semitic, homophobe, Islamophobe, can have a wide range of meaning. If you call someone an Islamophobe, it could mean someone who does not like people who practice Islam. It could mean someone who is against people of Islam. But in our modern day way of thinking, it can simply mean someone who just doesn't agree with the tenets of Islam. Islamophobe, same thing. Homophobe, someone who dislikes homosexuals, someone who is anti-homosexual, or it could mean someone who just disagrees with the culture and lifestyle of homosexual. Homophobe. Anti-Semitic means one who is against Jews, but actually in its original sense would have meant one who is against Semites, in which Arabs would also have counted. But that just goes to show you a little bit about how language can change and adjust, and the reason that that's interesting is because when we go to the very next chapter, chapter 11, the very beginning of chapter 11 discusses the Tower of Babel. And the Tower of Babel was a tower that was built and it was supposed to reach the heaven and reach the gods. God sees it and he comes down and he confuses their languages. And so rather than all of us speaking one language, we speak several. And again, those languages adjust over time. If you don't believe me, there have been words in our lexicon just in my lifetime which have changed meaning. And I went over just something as simple as phobe, which meant to have fear. But if you want to get even more into it, look at Old English. A truly Old English. And when you read it, you will not recognize, it's English, but you won't recognize it. It's like, what are they saying? You would have to read the translation underneath. And that all comes about because of the confounding of languages. And even once you have a language, that language over time will change. So from that point on, the rest of what we are looking at here, this is chapter 11, is a genealogy. And it is a genealogy that shows that Abram, the person we're going to be talking about for the most part, Abram here is a descendant of Shem. So Abram is a Semite. Now, we don't have anything known as the Jewish people or the Hebrew people yet. They have not come into existence yet. They don't, as a people group, they do not yet exist. But what the Bible wants us to understand is that Abram, who is seen as the father of the Jewish people, is a descendant of Shem, which makes him a Semite. So that's going to be the overview that we're going to get of chapter 10 and 11. Once again, we're not going to spend a lot of time there because most of it's genealogy. So let's jump into chapter 12. So what do we know so far? Noah had the three sons. The children of Shem are known as Semites. Shem has this genealogy of people that come down, and eventually we get to Abram. And that's where we are now. So let's go here. Okay, good. Close that. The Lord had said to Abram, "Go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you." Now, this is the promise that God is making. This is a covenant that God is making with Abraham. "I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whosoever curses you, I will curse. And all the people of the earth will be blessed through you." Let's look at this prophecy, this promise to Abram. And I often associate my journey in life with Abram. Now, don't take that, it's nowhere near the level, okay? And God has not promised me that a great nation will come out of me. I would say that my wife and I are well past the childbearing years, but that would be foolish to say considering the Abram story. But what I mean when I say that I look at my life and how some of it parallels with Abram is that God tells Abram to go. He doesn't tell him where to go specifically. He doesn't tell him where he's going to settle. He just tells him to go and makes him a promise. And I feel that that's the path that my life has taken. I was born and raised in Detroit, Michigan. I cut my teeth in ministry in Detroit, Michigan. I went from there to Ohio, and while I was attending seminary in a small town of Ashland, my ministry experience was serving under a wonderful pastor, Pastor Gilmore, in Cleveland. As a matter of fact, I've been blessed to serve under some great men of God. Pastor Michael Charles Raymond Neighbors, Pastor Charles William Butler, Reverend Sierra Tyus, and of course Pastor Gilmore, all great men of God that I learned a lot from. But I had this experience in urban inner city ministry, and then God says to me, "Go to Kansas." And he doesn't say go to Kansas City or Topeka or Wichita. He doesn't say go to Dodge City or Liberal. He says go to Greensburg, Kansas, South Central Kansas, population 730. Go to Greensburg where you will be one of very few African Americans, one of very few minorities. And I look at it and I look at how that parallels with Abram and how Abram was blessed because he listened. And I feel that I have been greatly blessed in ministry. I feel like I have been greatly blessed as a pastor because of my obedience to God. First Baptist Church of Greensburg, Kansas was a wonderful place to pastor. It was under that pastorate in which our three children came into our life. It was under that pastorate in which I grew and truly grew into the role of pastoring. And then he sent me to my current location. And it's all been a blessing. And I see parallels there with Abram. But to get back to Abram, let's look at the promise he made. And let's put, for absence of a better word, let's put God to the test. Did he keep his promise? I will make you, this is what he promises him. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. Now, we will see throughout Abram's life that he is indeed blessed. I will make you into a great nation. Regardless of what you may feel about Israel as a nation, you do have to admit that it is a powerful nation. It is a nation that is surrounded by people that do not even want it to exist. Yet it's able to hold its own. And when you look at the history of the Jewish people, it could be argued that the Jewish people should not exist with all of the hardship and the difficulty and the hatred that they have faced, yet they still do. So yes, that promise was made. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. Everyone knows the name Abraham, or well, they know it as Abraham. Three great religions claim Abraham as a father of that religion. I would say God kept that promise. I will bless those who bless you, and whosoever curses you, I will curse. Now that question, see, this is another area where it can get kind of hairy, because when you look at that, is he talking about Abraham or Abram? Is he talking about the nation of Israel? And here's why that's important. Because there will be those in modern times that will say that we must support Israel as a government no matter what. And we're not talking about the Jewish people. Because I do believe that we should support the Jewish people. Because, let's just face it, they've had it pretty rough. But I think that we can agree or disagree with Israel as a nation. We can agree as a government. We can agree or disagree with the policies that they set. We can agree or disagree with their behavior as a government and their direction. I don't think that we are setting ourselves up for a curse if we say, just for instance, and I am not taking a stance on this in this video. We can talk about it later, but let's just say, let's talk about settlements. You can say either I agree with those settlements, or I don't think that is something that the nation of Israel should do. You can say, well, I don't think that the checkpoints in the Palestinian area are advantageous. You can have those agreements and disagreements and not be cursed. We should not attack. We should not put down. We should not be anti-Semitic. But when it comes to government policy, we have the ability to support or challenge. So Abram went as the Lord had told him, and Lot with him. Abram was 75 years old when he set out for Haran. Just a young spring chicken. And he's going. God said go, and he's going. He took his wife Sarai, his nephew Lot, all the possessions they had accumulated, and the people they had acquired in Haran, and they set out for the land of Canaan. And they arrived there. So now another thing to remember, especially when we're looking at the Old Testament, is that when you see in the Bible in general, even the New Testament, but especially the Old Testament, and you hear them talk about a household, the household is much larger than what we are used to as a household. My household, to me, is my wife and children. It's 5 of us. When we look at the Bible and they talk about the household, they're talking about that person and all of their possessions and their servants. So if you had male and female servants, they were a part of your household. Your animals are a part of your household. So when they're talking about household, they're talking about all of that. And so Abram here sets out just as God had told him to do. Abram traveled through the land as far as the site of the great tree of Morah in Shechem. At that time, the Canaanites were in the land. The Lord appeared to Abram and said, "To your offspring I will give this land." So he built an altar there to the Lord, who had appeared to him. From there, he went out towards the hills east of Bethel and pitched his tent, with Bethel on the west and Ai on the east. There he built an altar to the Lord and called on the name of the Lord. Abram set out and continued toward the Negev. Now there was a famine in the land, and Abram went down to Egypt to live there for a while because the famine was severe. As he was about to enter Egypt, he said to his wife Sarai, I know what a beautiful woman you are. When the Egyptians see you, they will say, this is his wife. Then they will kill me, but will let you live. Say you are my sister, so that I will be treated well for the sake of my life and be spared because of you. Now there are a few things that come to mind here. One, people today would be very envious of what the beauty secrets were back then, seeing as Sarai is a woman in her either late 60s, late 60s at this point, and is so beautiful that Abraham is worried about being killed over her. The second thing is to understand that even Abram, who is going to be the father of three major religions, had his time when he did not put his faith in God. And that's not going to work out for him too well. When Abram came to Egypt, the Egyptians saw that Sarai was a very beautiful woman. And when Pharaoh's officials saw her, they praised her to Pharaoh, and she was taken into his palace. He treated Abram well for her sake, and Abram acquired sheep and cattle, male and female donkeys, and male and female servants and camels. But the Lord inflicted serious disease on Pharaoh and his household because of Abram's wife Sarai. So Pharaoh's servant summoned Abram. What have you done to me, he said. Why didn't you tell me she was your wife? Why did you say she is my sister, so that I took her to be my wife? Now then, here is your wife, take her and go. Then Pharaoh gave orders about Abram to his men then Pharaoh gave orders to Abram to his men, and they sent him on his way with his wife and everything he had. Now, one could argue that this was always a part of God's plan anyway, because one thing that happens with what Abram does is that because Pharaoh finds out, he's enriched. He's enriched simply because Sarai goes into his household, into Pharaoh's household. Pharaoh takes care of Abram by giving him all of these gifts. And then when he finds out, oh my goodness, this is the man's wife, he gives him even more. So one could say, well, it was a part of God's plan. Maybe so, but still, we cannot ignore the fact that Abram did not put his trust in God. He feared, and then he did what he did in terms of telling her to say, you are my sister and not my wife. So we've got a few minutes here, so what we're going to do is we're going to quickly recap. We start with the end of the flood. So the flood is over. We see the sons of Noah. And we know that his son Shem, all of the peoples that would descend from Shem are called Semites. Of the Semites that came out of Shem, the two that remain are the Jewish people and the Arab people, both Semites. But of course, in our modern day use of language, an anti-Semite is not someone who is against Semitic people. It is someone who is specifically against Jewish people. And we use the example of how the word phobe or phobia has changed from fear to meaning the different things that it can mean when addressing things like homophobia or Islamophobia. We then meet Abram, and we find that Abram is called by God. He's told to go. He goes, he takes his entire family, and then there's a promise that is made. And we look line by line at that promise, and we see that God did indeed fulfill that promise. Abram did become a great nation. His name was made great. there were great people that came out of him. So, as always, we see that God keeps his promises. So that is basically chapter 10 through 12, although our primary focus was on 12. We just looked at a few things in 10 and 11. And we're going to continue next week as well with this study. We're going to continue to study the book of Genesis. I want to personally thank those who talked me into doing this. I did not want to undertake this project, but I'm glad that I did. And so we're going to continue with it. With that, if this is something that benefits you, I would ask that you like and share it, and ask people to come and join in or to just watch when they get a chance. These Bible studies are posted on Facebook, on the First Baptist Stillwell Facebook page, on the Great Commission Ministry page, and on my personal page. They are also posted on our YouTube channel for the First Baptist Church of Stillwell, Kansas, as well as my personal YouTube channel. With that, may the Lord bless you and keep you. May heaven continue to smile upon you and grant you peace. That is my prayer.